hopefully that won't happen again. Okay, is everyone back, or should we give it a few more minutes? Okay, so where my computer freaked out was we were talking about the kleshas, right? So the avidya, the ignorance, asmita, ego, raga, desire or attachment, the desire for pleasure and for continuously leading our life seeking pleasure, right? So just because I think the important thing, sometimes yoga gets confused with like, oh, you're in this Om Shanti situation all the time, and that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we're trying to, again, see that we are not the seer, understand that we are not that which sees. We are not that which we experience. We are beyond that. We just happen to experience it because of our sense organs, because we've been given the opportunity to experience through our senses, through our mouth, through our eyes, through our ears, through our skin. But we are not that which experiences. We are beyond that. We are the consciousness that is present in the experience. And so when we're continuously seeking to feel good or to have good things around and only feel happy if our settings are perfect the way we like them, then we're not following the path, right? We're not doing yoga. Yoga is being able to be in this state of this good space where we don't identify with what we're not, even no matter what the conditions are, right? So it's important to keep that in mind, and I think this year has been a great opportunity for this practice, this kind of practice of not becoming attached to anything that might give us a sense of we're still in control, right? And the moment you start living that way in a condition like this, you have a lot of suffering because so many things are out of our control. So it's been a really great year to put all these things into practice. Dvesha, dislike, heat, enmity, aversion, right? We tend to move away or disregard or block out of our life things that are not pleasurable. They don't suit our palette of things we like and are okay with. And so we close our world, right? We discriminate and there's a lot of aversion. And so we close up in this state of ignorance. So with yoga, we're able to move beyond that, right? Because there is this understanding that we are not this. We are beyond that. And that which we are is the same in all of us. This just happens to be your current incarnation, your current costume, right? Through which your consciousness is expressing itself. For a very specific reason, you have this costume. And you're figuring it out each day as you wake up and live the life, right? And then abhinivesha, the love of life, the clinging to life, the fear of death, right? I particularly like when it's explained as the clinging to life, right? Because fear of death is a very complex thing, and I think if you're a little further ahead in the different stages of life, you might experience that more often of the fear of an end. But like I said, the understanding of these sutras continue to evolve, right, as you live. But I feel like in this phase where I am, there's a lot of sitting and thinking about how do I cling to life, right? How do we hold on, try to hold on to what is right now, and how do we react when we lose that, right? If tomorrow we might wake up and it might be different, and so that clinging to it, wanting to be the same as it is right now, that creates suffering. So all these 5 things are the 5 things that create suffering, and that continue to separate us more and more from our true essence, and they separate us more and more from others. So it's important to have these in mind. You can put them on your refrigerator. So if klesha is an affliction, And there's 3 stages of klesha, right? And so depending on which, this is a very intricate topic, but I'm just going to give a quick overview of it. Because Kriya Yoga, which is, you know, the second chapter of the sutras opens up with what Kriya Yoga is, the yoga of action. Tapas, the discipline. It's what we're doing is that we're burning through the seeds that we've come into this incarnation with. So whatever you did, if you believe in incarnation, but I'm going to speak about it because Patanjali believes in incarnation. That's the whole idea behind yoga, that you come in to this life having had the experiences, your soul, your consciousness had the experiences that it had in the previous vessel that it was in. And so you come in with that knowledge, and then you either choose to continue to use the vehicle that you've come in this life to continue to further down that road, or you can use this vessel to burn through those impressions that you've come in with and build new ones. And or actually not build, you're trying to not build anything so that the next time there's no next time. You're just consciousness. So that's the 3 stages. You come in and you thin out what you had before, and the next time you come in there's less thinning to do, and you just plant good seeds of just concentration, meditation, observation. And then the 3rd stage is there's no more seeds. There's this dissolution with what is, with pure essence. Okay? And again, these topics are very intricate. Like, I'm just like doing the tip of the iceberg, but you know, I encourage you to, whether you choose to look at some of these, and I'll go through the numbers that we did later if there's like a specific one that you liked. I encourage you to just spend some time looking at different translations of this one sutra that called to you the most, and see what each person has to say about it, right? Vyasa and Iyengar are 2 really good ones, but there's tons of other translations. So, you know, find what works for you and really dig in. Swami Satyananda has a really nice, you know, digestible version of it as well. That's a good one to start with. Okay, so now we're going to move into the yamas and niyamas. So he opens up the conversation of it by saying yama niyama asana pranayama pratyahara dharana dhyana samadhi ashto angani. So it's the 8 limbs of yoga. And these are yamas, which are self-restraint, things, 5 codes that he gives us to do towards to control the way that we react to others, or the way that we engage with others and with life. Niyamas are observances, 5 observances that we engage in towards ourselves, right? Asana is seat, that's what it translates to, but it's also known as posture, right? You take a seat in the posture. Pranayama, which is the regulation of your breath, so you're consciously making an effort to breathe in a certain way. Pratyahara, the withdrawal of the senses, so it's pausing the attention to go, turning the attention instead of outwards, inwards, towards the inner workings of your body, right? So that deep listening that I was referring to before. In the practice of Ashtanga Yoga, we use drishtis, or places of attention on the body, so that we can turn the eyes inwards, right? To the soul, to the inward experience of the self. And then when we do that, when we begin to move inwards, the quality of our concentration begins to shift. And dharana is the act of concentration. So we're choosing to move the attention inwards, to allow the senses to go away from what's coming at them, and to rest inwardly so that we can concentrate and we can hold that concentration. So we're keeping the mind collected. And when we do that for long enough, then it turns into dhyana, or meditation, or contemplation, where we become the act of concentration. We become attention. We become meditation. And when we do all of those things, then we rise above all of that. And samadhi is moving beyond that. It is reaching the state of pure consciousness, of merging, right? Total absorption of the self in that sustained attention. Any questions? Okay, so these 8 yamas, or these 8 limbs, the first 4, so yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, are known to be external practices, right? Things that we do externally to come into a place where we can concentrate. And then the last 3, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, are internal, right? So we've done the external work, now we can move inwards. Pratyahara is kind of can be on both sides, because it is still, you're taking something external and moving it inward, so it is both an external activity but also an internal holding. So it can be both internal and external. Okay, so what is ahimsa? Ahimsa, satya, these are the yamas. Ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha, yamaha. Ahimsa, non-violence or absence of harmful actions, right? So we're refraining from doing things that will harm others, right? Or refraining from doing things that will harm our own self. So how do we do that? By really observing ourselves and our actions, our interactions. Satya is truthfulness or honesty, being really honest with ourselves and with others, right? Using a language that will not harm someone, but yet is truthful. That's an art in itself, right? Refraining from trying to avoid situations that will make us not be truthful, right? Silence is always better than non-truth. Asteya, non-stealing, so not taking what doesn't belong to you, and not wanting that which doesn't belong to you. Brahmacharya is continence or chastity, also seeing as, trying to practice not taking too much, like not desiring too much, right? So being okay with what you have, right? So if you have a relationship, sticking to that, and this is a little bit of a tricky one, because the actual meaning of it is, it is towards the sexual chastity. But if you bring it into the context of the mind, it's, being really aware of where it's going, of not letting it sit on pure thoughts, not letting it spin off in, dirty thoughts or thoughts that are going to agitate your desires. Aparigraha is refraining from grabbing. Graha is grabbing, the mind grabbing. So you are, by practicing yoga in the way that we talked about, present now, by stilling the fluctuations of the mind, by realizing that we are not that which we see, or by falling into thinking that we are that which we see, by being aware of the 10 obstacles and the 5 things of affliction, the 5 afflictions that might happen to us. We're not grabbing, we're not trying to grasp at anything so that we don't create these afflictions, we don't create these obstacles. And it's also abstaining from greed. So whenever we do begin to feel a state of equanimity of the mind, we don't start to feel like, oh, I have to hold on to this. I can't lose this. I got to here, now I must hold on to it. No, that's not like, it's fine. If it goes, you have enough foundation that you can build it back. So it's not hoarding, not trying to hold on. That energy is just so limiting, right? So it's not doing that, refraining from doing that. And so you want to try to lead a life that what he suggests, I'm not saying that from myself, but what Patanjali invites us all to do is to really begin to watch our actions, our speech, our thoughts, so that we can begin to clean them up, to make sure that they're non-violent, that they're honest, that they're not taking something away from someone, that they're not filled with desire, they're contained, and that they're not trying to hoard or grab or make us feel greedy, wanting to hold on to them. And really being aware or willing to see that we always are given what we need. And I know that that is a very, it's a hard thing to say, because of course, how could you say that when someone is really suffering, you know, like what's going on in India now, or when, you know, there was a tsunami or a war. Like, it's a hard thing to say, but this is what he is telling us, that at any given point, and you know, it's really rooted also in, you know, this, even though yoga is not linked to Hinduism, it is part of India that it comes out of. So in, you know, the culture of India is to believe that you're born in any given manifestation because there's something that you need to learn through that. And so if suffering happens to you, if early death happens to you, or if your family has terrible things happening to them, that's what your soul's journey had to be. So that's, I feel like I have to put that in that context because it's such a hard thing to say. And then in this way, when we're aware of we're living in this way, we are freed from our attachments. We find a little freedom. We find a little release, right? Because we're not generating future karma. We're just not creating any binding situations. We're unbinding ourselves from improper interactions that will later cause suffering to another and therefore to ourselves, right? Because we're all part of one. Okay, this is ahimsa. Ahimsa pratishtayam tatsannidau vairagya. When nonviolence in speech, thought, or action is established, one's aggressive nature is relinquished and others abandon hostility in one's presence, right? So whenever we act in a certain way, we serve as examples. That's what we comes back at us, right? Because there is that space. We give the opportunity for a good interaction, right? I'm not going to go through all the words, otherwise we'll never make it through. Satya, second one, is Satya pratishtayam kriya phala shrayatvam. When the sadhaka, or the practitioner, is firmly established in the practice of truth, I love this one, his words become so potent that whatever he says comes to realization. So whenever you are, you know, and then often people read this and it's like, oh, well then, you know, I gotta do this so the good things come to me. But whenever you're honestly walking this path and you're not trying to force the reality that you want upon your life, you're just being there, observing, not reacting, you know, which doesn't mean you're not active in your life. You are, but you're not, your ego's not imposing. Then you begin to cultivate that around you, right? Your mind is clear. You begin to see what your next step needs to be, right? There is that lack of constant chaos that is preventing you from seeing or hearing what the next thing needs to be, right? So when the action is honest and truthful, right, that is a good foundation. We're firmly, and that happens when we are firmly established in our practice of truthfulness, right? Whatever we say comes into realization because it is established in truth, right? And it's a commitment that you make to yourself, and as you make that commitment, like your whole body just becomes that, right? Just like we do asanas to embody these different sages and animals and objects, or not objects but nature things. We try to embody them. We try to understand their experience. We try to, you know, surrender to them so that we may receive some of their qualities, right? That is the kind of mind we want to have, that we're able to be in wherever we are and absorb it and see it for its truth and give back with truthfulness. Okay, next, yama asteya pratishtayam sarvaratno pastanam. When abstention from stealing is firmly established, precious jewels come. right? So when we are firmly established in not taking, not desiring, right? Then all these nice things begin to come to us. We don't have to go out and get them for ourselves. They will come to us because that's the right time when they should come. And you might have experienced this in your life where you're trying to get something and there's all these things that get in the way, right? And then you never get to it and you feel so exhausted and so just let down. Versus whenever you're not trying to run towards something or grasp at something, you're just doing your practice, you're going about your life, being, truthful, being not harming other people, and all of a sudden things come at you and you're like, oh wow, this thing happened. Yeah, it happened because you planted the seeds for it. Because you didn't put a preconceived idea of what you should be doing. It just came because you were open to it, because you created it, you prepared the soil for you to see it. So I hope this is making sense. So not taking what doesn't belong to us, not desiring what we don't have, right? Allowing things to come, and knowing that that's just the right thing. There's nothing else that you should be doing. Brahmacharya pratishtayam virya lavaha. Brahmacharya, the other yama. When the sadhaka or the practitioner is firmly established in continence, knowledge, vigor, valor, and energy flow to him. Right? So whenever we are not expanding sexual energy, and this is very linked to Tantra, they have there's a whole thing on how the use of sperm, because that's you're losing the essence of life, these drops of life that we have 10 of. When you have too much sex, you're losing that vital energy, those drops of vital energy. So it's all about transforming the sexual energy into spiritual energy, right? And uniting within the self. So the outward movement, again, moves inwards, right? So there's a lot of retention involved in the tantric philosophies, which I'm not going into because I'm not an expert of. But I think a good takeaway from this is not being guided by sensory pleasure. So not trying to lead your life hopping from one thing that gives you pleasure to the next, and not becoming attached to that which gives you pleasure, and build a life around that, because that's going to crumble and then you're going to be very unhappy. Aparigraha, the last of the yamas. Aparigrahastairye janmakatanta sambodha. Knowledge of past and future lives unfolds when one is free from greed or for possessions. Knowledge of past and future lives unfolds when one is free from greed for possessions. Right? So when we are not trying to take or grasp or hold on to, there is this freedom. There is this space that opens up, right? Whenever you might have experienced it, like in a relationship, things begin to go a little strange when you're trying to hold on to your partner. They want to go out and you're trying to keep them home with you, or they're going on a trip without you, and you're holding on to this fact that you're not with them and what they might do when you're not there. So this grasping, this trying to hold on to something or someone creates so much suffering, right? And so when you're able to transcend that, then you're able to really see the real knowledge of life, really experience the freedom that comes with non-attaching, not holding. And you realize that it's really all an illusion, because nothing ever belongs to us anyway. So it's good to think about that all the time. And that's a very hard one. I just lost myself. Okay. And also I think, with yogis, it's there's this tendency for us to kind of, especially when we're beginners, to have a belief and hold on to it so tightly. Like, I have to do this or else I'm not a good person, or I have to practice in this way or else I'm not getting the benefits. And be careful with that, because that's not yoga. Yoga is very flexible. Yoga is it doesn't have one way, right? So that's why you can come into this practice at any given moment, and it's for anybody, because it's not one way. So I think that as you continue to learn more and more, you'll see that, what you might think you're doing right now, it's going to change, and it might be contrary from what you thought today. So try as much as you can to not hold on tightly to anything. Just let it come and let it go. That's part of this as well, parigraha. Okay, so these are the niyamas. Saucha, santosha, tapa, swadhyaya, ishvara pranidhanani. Shaucha is cleanliness or purity. Santosha is contentment. Tapa is heat, but also like heat in the body, because that creates cleansing, and it allows for the body to be prepared for the mind to begin to do its thing, its own Kriya Yoga. But it's also the heat that's created with discipline, right? By showing up and the friction that's created with an involvement, a full involvement of yourself in an activity. That's heat as well. Right? So it's discipline and the heat of discipline, and also the heat that's generated physically. Swadhyaya, study which leads to the knowledge of the self. So sacred texts, which include like the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, any of the Vedas, the Yoga Sutras. Ishvara Pranidhana is surrender to God, but also it's God as in, like, it could be religious if you're religious, or it could just be Mother Nature, it could be the universe, it could be anything that is greater and bigger than us, so that we can surrender to it, right? And that's why it's so important to have a teacher, because often we begin this kind of concept by placing, God, the teacher is God, because we're surrendering to them, we're trusting them to guide us on the path, and so they take the shape of God for a given period of time, and then we move on to the next thing, right? But it's having something or someone that you surrender to, and being, if it's going to be someone, that being very mindful about who you pick, and it's where you're placing dana, you're placing your concentration, your full concentration onto something, onto God, as specified by Patanjali. So these are practices, the practices of yoga are practices that deepen the practitioner's devotion, right? The practitioner's understanding of what devotion and surrender is. And it's rooted in self-discipline and deep observation through that discipline. So as you do yoga, you're not thinking about your shopping list, or as you teach yoga, you're not thinking about the next thing, but you're deeply present, you're deeply observing what's going on. You're being disciplined about the way that you interact, and the way that you react, right? And it's both internal and external cleanliness, right? You're cleaning the body through the asana practice, through the heat, but also you are externally cleaning your body so that you can move inwards. Okay. Shaucha. So shaucha, svanga jagupsa, pariyaha, asamsargaha. Cleanliness of body and mind develops disinterested in contact with others for self-gratification. So saucha is cleanliness. Sauchat with the T at the end is by cleanliness, by practicing purity, by doing actions that will generate cleanliness. Spa is the self, and anga is limbs. Jugupsa, aversion or dislike. Asamsargaha, non-contact. Right? So the cleanliness of body and mind develops disinterested in contact with others for self-gratification. So we do practices of yoga to cleanse the vessel that is the body, the vessel of something that is beyond the body, right? For the seer, for that pure consciousness. And a practice is to not engage in thoughts that are impure and speech that is impure. Like cleaning up your speech is one of the first things that you can do. Cleaning up your diet so that your body is clean on the inside. Cleaning up your actions, so they're actions that are established in the yamas. And your interactions, right, established in the yamas as well. And then doing that regularly, right, establishing tapas, which comes later, but establishing a discipline that will continue to remind you on a daily basis. And all the parts of the self, your physical, your intellectual, your emotional, all of it, you're cleansing all of it. Santosha, contentment. Santoshat anuttama sukhalabhaha. From contentment and benevolence of consciousness comes supreme happiness. Right? So we, by acting in this way, in this non-harmful way, in this truthful way, by cleansing ourselves, by putting our mind on God, by observing ourselves, we begin to feel the sense of contentment, of fulfillment, inner fulfillment that is not attached to anything external, that's not given to us by anybody, but it is just, it arises, it flourishes from within, just like the lotus, right, that comes out of the pond, that image of this beautiful thing that comes out of this murky water, right? That's what we're doing. We're polishing everything so that we can flourish. And even if what we're flourishing in, the flourishing happens because the root is sturdy. And so it can move through all the distractions, all the obstacles, all the afflictions. It can move through them without attaching, without getting stalled in its growth towards the sun. So that's what we're doing. It's not that everything, we're getting rid of all the stuff that's, going to create obstacles. We're just not engaging with it. Sukha is happiness, very good space. We're creating this good space that is untouched by what is external. And this is tapa is a very important part of this, right? And in keeping surrender to a higher self, to the higher being, to God, to universe, Mother Nature, whatever that might be. I think I forgot to put, here we go. Samadhi Siddhi Ishvara Pranidhana. Hold on, I am skipping around here. Okay, I've forgotten to put in tapa. Tapaha is discipline, right? So it is, I don't have a slide for it, but it is, as I was saying before, it is the heat. It is the friction, the positive friction that is created by a regular practice. It is the heat that is created, the positive heat that is created when we're concentrating on one thing. So I don't know if you guys have ever tried this meditation where you stare at a candle, like at the flame of a candle for 5 or 10 minutes, and you just stare at it. And as it moves or as it flickers, you just keep your mind on it for long enough that when you close your eyes, you can still see the flame in your eye, in the inner sight. So tapa is that. It's that deep concentration, that deep, the discipline is so ingrained that the presence is pure and attent and in the now. So we want to practice in a way that is disciplined like that. Focused, concentrated, gathered, right? And then we create heat through that. Oh, it was here. Tapa. Okay, so then we burn the impurities by doing that. Swadhyayat ishtadevata samprayogaha. Swadhyaya is self-observation, right? It's observing ourselves through practice and through reading of scripts, of scriptures, of texts that are enlightening, that are guiding us to learn the next thing, to stay on the path. So as practitioners, as teachers, we are constantly trying to learn. We're constantly trying to figure out where the avidya is, where the ignorance is, where are we acting out of ego, where are we acting from a place of aversions, of wanting to grasp, of wanting to cling. So this constant study of the self, by continuing to gather knowledge or sit on the knowledge that we have been given and observe. And in the traditional yogic tradition, you will have like a deity or something that you are particularly devoted to. And so that's kind of the thing that keeps you in track. So in the morning, when you're in India, like every family has a deity that they've been given. And so every morning the day starts by doing a ritual that gives thanks and humility. You bow down to this divinity, to this higher source, right? And then that enables you to tap into a place that you're going to live out of yamas and niyamas, out of these places of deep attention. Hopefully. It doesn't always happen, but you try. So the practice for us would be what that is, right? You step on the mat first thing in the morning, and that's planting the seed of intention of how you're going to lead the remaining of the day so that you can be here now, so that you can create a little space between what's happening at you and how you're perceiving it, and realizing that you're just observing it. It's not happening to you or at you. You're just observing it. Samadhi Siddhi Ishvara Pranidanat, the last of the niyamas, surrender to God, which brings perfection in samadhi, right? Perfection in union. So samadhi is this profound meditation, this absorption. You become that which you observe. So if you're placing your mind on this beautiful divinity, or this beautiful tree, or this beautiful ocean, or whatever it might be for you, you become that. You take on its qualities. So that's a nice thing to do. You just, when you meditate, just really put your mind to something that is higher than, bigger than you, and embody that. And as you continue to sit with it, you'll start to notice that you take on some of their qualities. And hopefully, it's a sattvic quality, like a sweet and nourishing and positive quality. So surrender is a big part of it, and keeping the mind on God. And sometimes it's hard for me to say God because I'm not necessarily religious, but I love this idea of God, because then you might have a beautiful tree in your yard, and that could be, when you walk by it, that could be God. It could be a reminder of like, wow, this, I'm so lucky that this is here, and that I can take this in without attaching to it, because it's beyond the point, but it's just reminding me that that's how big life is, And so you walk around keeping that in your mind, keeping in your mind the strength of that which you are observing. And that is what enables you to continue to go forward, to continue to study, to continue to be on the path. And eventually that will release you from these afflictions, the 5 afflictions, the ignorance, the ego, the fear, the aversion, the clinging, all of those. Okay, so the conclusion to this whole thing, right, is that we want to try to minimize the karma, which is the bonding, the binding ourselves to someone in a negative way, or to something in a negative way. We want to release the bonds. We want to release the entanglement, so that we don't generate future interactions that we don't want to be part of, right? And we want to base all of our actions in ahimsa, right? In nonviolence, in truthfulness, in discipline, all the things that we talked about, so that our mind can begin to settle. Because when you act from a place of truthfulness, you don't go back home and think like, oh man, if later that person talks to someone else and they find out that wasn't true, and you can't sleep. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that to yourself. So that's why we practice these things, so that we don't suffer, right? So that we don't create that future karma. We want to undo that so that the mind can just be still, can just find a place where it can focus on and have the experience, the inward experience of who we are, right? And that's something that you want to ask yourself every day. Who am I? Who am I? Right? And try to thread through the yoga teacher, the mother, the partner, the person with long hair, I don't know, anything. Just work through what am I? But if I'm not that, if tomorrow morning I wake up and I can no longer teach yoga, who am I? And just keep asking yourself that, and that will guide you towards this true, pure essence of the self. So that eventually you can still the mind, you can uncover your true essence, right? That's what we really want to come out of this life having done. And to put it in some weird form, it's really having undone. But we learn about our desires, our anger, our greed, our arrogance, our jealousies, and we try to not act in that way anymore. And we just observe. We see ourselves in action, and we try to create a little space so that there's less reaction, there's more inward movement. And that's it. That's all I was going to talk to you about today. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, I wanted to actually read this to you all because I think this is beautiful. So we'll close with this, and then I'll take questions if there are. I know that we're running over time, but so Iyengar says his treatise on yoga is called Yoga Darshana. He's referring to Patanjali. Darshana means vision of the soul and also mirror. The effect of yoga is to reflect the thoughts and actions of the aspirant as in a mirror. The practitioner observes the reflections of his thoughts, mind, consciousness, and action and corrects himself. This process guides him toward the observation of his inner self. So I suggest that if you like this, you take a picture of it and you read it over and over, as the days that come, and see how you can be a mirror to yourself. See how your practice can be a mirror to yourself. See how your students can be a mirror to yourself, right? And then learn from everything that comes in your path. You're welcome. Yes. Stop share. Oh, here we go. Sounds good. I don't know that I'm. Thank you. It's a beautiful practice too. So my teacher is Jaya Shri. I don't know if some of you might have heard of her, but she has recordings on iTunes that you can purchase, and she chants. She has one that's like word by word, and then one that's like all the way through. And it's such a nice, we were just talking about placing your mind on something like God or higher. That's a nice thing to place your mind on. You just chant them, and then they start to open up to you. You don't even have to read them. They just because they're sitting in your consciousness, they just open up. So check her out, Jaya Shri. She's this beautiful older lady. She's so much wisdom. She's a mama of many, and she's actually a university professor. She comes to the United States quite often. She's a very intelligent, knowledgeable being. Yeah. Yes, that's a great idea. Okay. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, I for sure. Absolutely. I know it's a lot. It's a lot, and you're probably mind dull. You're so welcome. Thank you for being with me. You're very welcome. And if I may suggest, in terms of like the reading of the sutras, I wouldn't just like read from cover to cover. Just pick, like, randomly open, especially like the first and the second chapter. Just open it up, see what you land on, and get really curious about that, and read a few different interpretations of it, and then when you feel like you're ready for another one. But it's not about knowing them all, but just having a nice understanding, and like really letting it seep into your life. So I would suggest doing it that way more than just sitting in one reading, kind of going through it. Mm-hmm. There's 108. 108. Which is it's equivalent. Well, it's the Om is 100. It's like the equivalent to Om. So it embodies all the different states of existence. So the dream state, the life state, like the interactive state, and then the subconscious state. So it embodies. Oh, I think my earbuds died. Hold on. It embodies all the different states of existence. So it's a very sacred number. Did you guys hear me? Can you hear me, Liz? Liz, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me now? Okay. Am I back? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it's the Om. It's like the 3 different states of existence, and it's the whole universe narrows down to 108. And it's something crazy. Like, I'm not expert at this, but like in the astrology, the Vedic astrology, they measure the distance between the moon and the sun, and the sun and the moon. The moon and the earth, and the sun and the moon, and something else. It's all like 108, whatever system they use to measure. I can't remember, but I think it's like 108 moons between the moon and the earth, 108 moons between the moon and the sun, something like that. I'm probably not saying it right, but I know this because my son was born at 108, and I freaked out when they told me it was 108, because I was like, oh my god, and it was like a new moon. And I looked it up, but I can't remember exactly. So if that's something that interests you, you can definitely Google 108 Vedic astrology meaning, but it's a very special number. Hi, Michael. Nice to finally meet you.
Okay. So one of the things you mentioned brought up a question in me. You briefly mentioned about suffering, suffering. We kind of go through suffering. It leads us to a better place sometimes. The reason it triggered a question is because my son is 18. and he likes nothing better than to discuss and debate philosophy. So where we often grapple with philosophy and we have good discussions, but where we always break apart is on the question of are you still there?
Yeah.
Well, we always kind of fall apart in the discussion as we get deeper and deeper is on the question of physical suffering and whether there's any good to it. Not the suffering like we might do in a yoga practice, but actual true torment and torture.
Yeah.
So he actually is of the opinion that there is no bad suffering. There's no such thing as there's nothing negative about any suffering because we don't know where it leads to eventually. Centuries down the road, we don't know where that will lead. It might lead to goodness. We can't make a judgment of that. I don't like the idea of physical suffering, especially pain or unnecessary pain more so. Do you have any idea what the sutras or what your own stance is on that?
Yeah, that's a very good, wow, you guys have amazing conversations. That's a really good question and a really hard one to answer. I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but I think that what your son has a lot of wisdom, because I think that's the general outlook here. And I think, the yogic approach is that, which no matter the amount of suffering, that's what your incarnation was meant to experience or go through. And it's about whether the soul is whether you're able to transcend that and see that you are not that suffering, no matter how hard or terrible. And it's hard for me to even say it because, I live and I think a lot of people that are able to do this teacher training or that are able to practice yoga, we live a very privileged life. So it's easy for me to bring forth this teaching, but that's what the sutras do point to, which is that we come with a set of things that are going to happen to us, and whether we follow that path or whether we're able to transcend our not build any karma so we don't lead into that, or we're able to see the suffering that's coming at us as part of our learning process, because the whole idea behind the sutras is that we are not this body. So I think that your son has a very valid point, and it's a very hard thing to digest and even talk about, right? I struggle with that a lot myself, so I completely understand where you're coming from, because it's hard to digest the fact that someone is coming into this world and is going to suffer. It's very hard to take that in, but the idea behind all these teachings are that we are beyond that. We're transcending that. Does that answer your question? It's not really, I don't know that I have enough knowledge to really fully explain that or discuss that, but from a very beginner's understanding, I would say that your son brings a really good point, and he's very wisdomful. Maybe he should come and have this conversation with all of us.
Yeah, he's very